find things like alternative medicines such as plant medicine, amphibian medicine, or anything other than Western medicine, and that can induce a heart opening, a heart cracking, which kind of will go from root sacral right into our heart and can essentially skip the solar plexus.
Welcome back to the Power and Purpose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'm super excited for today's conversation and also all the conversations set up for 2025. So thank you everyone for staying with me on this journey. I can't believe I started the podcast at the end of 2023. And it's been, when I was reviewing my New Year's goals from last year and seeing how much I accomplished, and not just accomplished in the typical sense, but like how much experience I actually had through these conversations. The podcast was one of my 2024 highlights. So, yes, thank you for joining. And then today we have Maria. Help me with your last name because I always fumble with it.
Yeah, it's Betancur.
Okay. Maria Bentancur.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. She's a soul sister of mine. Yeah. And first off, I just want to thank you for coming onto the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We've been kind of planning this for a while, and so no coincidence that it ended up landing fresh, onto 2025. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. The question I love to ask everyone is who are you or who are you not?
Um, who am I? I would say I am Maria Camila Betancur. I'd like to say I am not my past, although my past makes me who I am today in the integration of all that I am. I am many facets, I am multi layered, I am this and that. And so it feels like it's a question that can't be answered in short. I am so many things. And it reminds me when you ask that question of like Ram Dass when he says, becoming nobody, first you get to become somebody before you become nobody. So I am on my journey of what has been like to become somebody, to get to know myself, all of me, and continue to do so on my way to recognizing the depth of I am you, you are me, and I am a mirror to everybody else that I
Mm,
get to come into contact with.
mm. And thank you for that reminder from Ram Dass, because that was one of the first things I heard when I discovered him. And I was like, ooh, yeah, that hits. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that question because it does invite a lot of fluidity into our lives so that we don't get stuck in who we were yesterday or trying to divine us to be some future version and then but also get so attached to that too. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Beautiful. So today we're going to talk about so many things. One, you are the founder of the Hive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the Hive is a very soulful, unique church. That's how I was feeling into the vibration. And we're going to get into it because I think it's so important for us to redefine what it means to be in faith and in community. And but redefine it because for a lot of us, we've grown up in religious backgrounds or it's been very structured or it's been very boxed in. And then there's also some fear, some of us have seen people like go into cult spaces or I don't know, spaces where they kind of might have lost themselves and maybe they didn't have as much sovereignty as they wanted, those types of things. But before we get to all of that, first, I want to just know a little bit about your turning point. Everyone has one. And I mean, we have several. I've had like 20. But what do you feel like is one of the turning points that has really made an impact in your current path right now?
Yeah, so as you said, we do have multiple, there are those moments of catharsis, the catharsis that really invites you to look inward and shed some deep layers, have deep deaths to have rebirth. And one of the very first ones for me was when I divorced my first husband. And it was for me, growing up, I grew up very fast. I went to, by the time I was in college, sophomore in college, I was still in high school, graduating from high school. So by the time I finished high school, I was already a sophomore in college, is what I'm saying. I was halfway through my bachelor's, essentially. And so I grew up very, very fast. So at age 19, I was already engaged, on my way to be married and fulfilling kind of what I was conditioned to believe was the path to happiness, which was, get a job, graduate from college with a bachelor's, with a degree, right? Get a job, make good money, be engaged or married, all the things, have the house, the car, checking all the boxes. And I did check all those boxes, at 20, 21, 22 years old. I was already married, made six figures, had the car, had the home, all of the things, and yet I was not happy. My marriage was not what I thought marriage would be like. It was actually quite toxic in many ways. And then, I decided to divorce my first husband after there was some infidelity there. And that just kind of had me get down to my knees and say, like, God, like, what is this? Like, what is life supposed to be? Show me, and like slap me in the face so I can really understand, is what I asked. And from there just kind of began like this whole journey of finding myself, for the first time. And I continue to refine myself over and over again ever since. But
Oh.
that's Satya. Um, but I feel that that was the very first time that I asked myself, there's more here. And it's not what society told me is. And so that set me on a path I went on an eat, pray, love journey where I traveled to Italy, to Greece, and started really finding myself. And that was the very first time that I accessed plant medicines. I did ayahuasca with my father, which was a really beautiful experience and kind of gave me the depth of understanding of why I ended up with my first husband, and to be able to forgive my father, and not just forgive him, but actually we don't get to I believe through all the work I've done, we don't get to forgive our parents. Um or rather we get to forgive them, but they're not the ones that should be asking for forgiveness. And that's a whole nother story, but I was able to forgive my father and also ask him for forgiveness for the way that I judged him. And kind of for a mistake that he made once, I just continued to judge over and over again, therefore setting the standard of the kind of man that I was attracting into my life, which turned to be my first husband. And so that was my first turning point, when I accessed this technology of ayahuasca to be able to help me unlock pieces of me.
Wow, that is so profound. So profound. And with the forgiveness piece and our parents, so important. I one time I did Ho'oponopono, before I went to work. I was selling houses. You have a real estate background too. And I only did it for like 5 or 10 minutes, but it was my first intentional thing towards, asking just forgiveness, loving, the parent, right? My mom. And I just broke out into tears. And that day that whole week, I just felt a big clearing, just from doing Ho'oponopono on my own. So I love that you brought up that piece. Um, and the next thing is, on the eat, pray, love journey, what was something significant that happened there?
Um, so I guess significant outside of, the ayahuasca ceremony, that was very significant, of course. It was the recognition that I was seeking for love outside of myself, that was not love that I was primarily giving to myself. So part of my journey where I went to Italy, for example, for 2 weeks, it was me by myself backpacking and going to dinners, taking myself out to dinner and doing like all of these things for me, without having a partner or a friend that I was traveling with, just by myself and introducing myself into these. So I would go, I did like a wine tour and then a pizza making and gelato. And so I went by myself. And of course, everybody was either with their partner or their friend. And I just got like submerged into the group, being by myself, but ultimately just caring for me, and doing it for me, and really staying also off of social media because I didn't want it to be like, look at what I'm doing, right?
Mm.
Like, I feel a lot of what I used to do before that was, okay, I'm going to take myself out to a date, but then I'm going to, like, post about it and
Post it.
be on my phone and show off what I'm actually doing for myself. And am I actually doing it for me, or am I doing it to sell to somebody else that I'm doing it for me? And so that was kind of very impactful for me at that time.
Hmm. Yeah. And how else was it like? Because to me, I'm just imagining myself taking myself, well, I'm imagining myself doing nothing for 2 weeks, going backpacking, and that would be very challenging because I'm such a doer. But what was it like? Was it also awkward, or did you just bask in your own company?
Well, it was interesting, as I guess the best word to put it, because um, I was deep in my grief from the divorce with my first husband. And so there were days where I don't want to get out of bed. And here I
Mm.
am in Italy, in one of the most beautiful, countries. And I was just like, no, I'm going to stay in this bed. I'm going to order Uber Eats and I'm just going to cry and let whatever emotion is needing to come through. And so there were days like that. And then there were days where I was like, yeah, I'm going to go on this wine tour. And it went kind of like back and forth. And then of course, Italian men are so flirtatious. So I would get the like guys like, kissing my hand and wanting to sit with me. And I'm like, no, thank you, I'm by myself. Thank you. They see a woman by themselves and they want to, kind of court her. And so it was a lot of like, no, thank you. Um, I'm a kind of outgoing person, so it's not uncomfortable for me to be out there, and put myself out there in those ways. So that didn't feel uncomfortable. It was more of that like fluidity of giving myself what I needed, which was whether crying in the room and ordering Uber Eats and doing nothing, or completely going out there and going to, the Vatican or, Rome or whatever. So.
Mm. That's so beautiful. And as we transition, I can't wait to talk to you more about Hive. But first, what was your inspiration, or what was the birthing of Hive like? When did it happen, or how did it happen?
Yeah, so once I discovered, or rather rediscovered ayahuasca, I did it in Colombia, where I'm from. I'm originally born and raised in Colombia, and we call it yahe, which is ayahuasca, is just the way we call it. So it's ayahuasca is more known, but it's the same thing. And so once I rediscovered that, I began to connect deeper to my lineage and access these kind of shamanic practices that were there all along, that I just had not remembered. And it's quite funny because on the way to be with ayahuasca again, it was it started like coming to my field of my aunt, out of all people, telling me about it, then a friend of mine. And I'm like, I thought we don't do this because it's drugs and drugs are bad. Right? Like, I grew up Catholic. I went to nun school, women only, and so like it was very strict household. And so for my aunt to be telling me this, that I should go do this, and that she went to a sweat lodge and all these things she did. And I look up to her. She's like the hippie of the family. And I mean, I guess not anymore because here's me now. But back then, she was like the only hippie of the family, had a beautiful husband and children. And so she invites me into this world, and it's kind of like I take a peek at it, and the veil all of a sudden lifts, and I begin to find more and more layers of myself. And then I introduced to Fit for Service, which is where you and I met. And then Fit for Service continues to open up worlds for me of remembrance of different things. And I travel back to Colombia. I begin to study shamanism and then get my Reiki certification and all of these different tools that I say that I added to my spiritual tool belt to help me remember. And through all of those tools that I did for myself, I was able to recognize that not only were these tools that I wanted to continue to apply for myself and the way I choose to live day to day, but also tools that I felt called to support others with and be of service to life, to spirit. In this way, to guide people kind of through the journey that I lived in a way that would feel supportive and safe, because especially for a woman, safety is very important when we're accessing these alternate states and very vulnerable states. And so along the way, I met who is my teacher today and has been for over 6 years. Her name is Millie. She really showed me the way and became my mentor, my teacher, my guide, and yeah, kind of opened up deeper layers. Um, and so I began to realize what it really meant to be in service, service of life, service to spirit, and hold space for others. And I did this out of my home in Miami because I lived in Miami then. And along the way, I knew, well, I want this to be bigger in the sense of not so much like more people, but in a sense of like my home could only provide one bedroom of support for the person or my backyard versus having a space that's bigger where people can come and stay the night and disconnect to be able to connect inwardly. So I traveled, to Colombia, to Ecuador, to Costa Rica, to Mexico, to Peru, to many, many places to see how they did it. And one of the biggest things that my shamanic teacher from Colombia taught me was you don't want to live in the same home where you're doing the work because then you're never having that spaciousness for you to like take off the hat of guide and really just rest and nourish and replenish your energy. And so that kind of became my intention of like, well, I want to have a center, a space big enough where there can be a ceremonial home and then there can be the space where it's my sanctuary, my home, where I get to be and relax. And as I got closer to Fit for Service in the community, I realized that Austin was the place where I wanted to do it. So by this time, I decided I want to be moving to Austin, and this is where I want to be opening up the space. And that's when I meet David and Danielle, who were my partners. And they originally wanted to open up a retreat center with other friends they had in Arizona. And through kind of having conversations and talking about it, it made sense. And they agreed that they would like to kind of do it together and do it here in Austin. And that's how the Hive was originally founded.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I love that you're redefining what it means to have community and faith together. Because, most of us come from the traditional church. And so, what was that like? Did you feel, was there any particular challenges in your experience in creating this new space, this new concept of community? And then between that and your past background with church or religion or anything like that?
Yeah, so I would say, so as I mentioned earlier, I grew up Catholic and I went to nun school, women's only. And then when I moved to the States, we kind of tried Christianity, like Christian churches, and then our regular Catholic churches. Around the age of 16, I said, no more. I don't want this. I don't like it. At 10 years old, when I had my first communion, part of the preparation for first communion is that you have to you have to confess your sins to the priest. The priest goes and talks to God talks to the priest tells you what you do to repent. And at 10 years old, I was asking myself, why is there an intermediate between me and God? Why can't I have a communication with God? And so by the time I was 16, 17, and I was old enough to kind of say, like, no, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to do this. I kind of swung the pendulum to the other side of, like, I don't want anything to do with this. And then around the age of 18 and 19, I began to get closer to it and recognize, like, there is a higher power. There is something there. I just want to approach it in my own terms. And through the use of these entheogens, these technologies, ayahuasca, bufo, combo, mushrooms, I began to connect deeper to that God that I believe is there, and ultimately recognizing the God is within, and in you and in everybody else. And so that had been kind of my journey of evolution, to get deeper and deeper connected to the faith that I believe to be true. And that brought me closer to Mother Mary. And then it started bringing me into, well, who is Mary Magdalene? And is she actually the whore that is said on so many places, right? Or is she actually the divine feminine and Christ consciousness in female body? And, all of these different things. And so it's kind of interesting, because then we end up opening what the Hive is. But originally it was a center, right? And part of my desire was to file to become an official church. And I thought it was more because of legality reasons. And then I began to dive deeper and sit with it in my own meditations and my own self discovery. And when I came to recognize that it wasn't about so much the legality of things, but rather that naming it and saying, I wholeheartedly believe in this as my faith, my body of Christ, my church, and my way of living. And I'm not afraid to bring it forth to the government or to conditioned religion. And so as I dove deeper into that, to the understanding of the magnitude of what was actually happening, I began to recognize the teachings from the church back in the day that did resonate with me, which was the way the Christian church helped, for example, my mother and I, when we were like, had nothing, and my mom was pregnant with my brother, and we needed resources, food, clothes for my newborn brother. The way they came through and helped us was so powerful. The way we could find like-minded people that were going through similar struggles. But then where it kind of came out of resonance was, God will love you if you behave in this way in order for you to be part of this community and this church. And so all of that began to be my groundwork for understanding, what does a church mean to me? And reading textbooks of Christ consciousness, of the lost years of Jesus, of the Mary Magdalene gospel, and really beginning to dig deeper into this, coming into the realization that Christ consciousness is, we don't have a second coming, in that there's another Jesus coming. The Christ consciousness is actually awakening our inner sun, our solar plexus, awakening the Christ consciousness within. And that what we need in order to do that, it's simply a safe container that will allow us to go inward, to explore all parts of ourselves, whatever that looks like for you. If you come out of that and you're like, well, I decided I want to be this, or I want to be that, all of it being welcome, because I have no agenda in what you get to be. All of my intention, and the intention here of the Hive, is to be that safe container where you feel safe to explore yourself, not just adding another layer of condition, but rather just, here's a safe space where we will nurture you and hold you, but we won't tell you what to do. You can find it for yourself. And in that, being able to relate with other people that are like-minded and building that community. And so when there is those, like, hey, I don't have food on my table right now. Hey, I'm really needing this support, healing, or walking me through this way, are you there for me? Hey, I'm not doing well at home. I need a place to stay. Can I go there? And so it fills my heart when people from the community, brothers or sisters, will reach out and say, like, hey, I'm not doing well. Can I go to the Hive? Right? Because they recognize that this is a safe sanctuary, of refuge for when they're needing that support to just be, and not necessarily be with me, because I'm just the vessel that's holding this together, but be with spirit, be with the land, the animals, the elements, be in solitude and silence to be with yourself and find your own questions or answers to those questions.
Hmm. So beautiful and so much to unpack there. First, just a quick side question, and I'll tie this into some other questions that I have just to kind of get clarity on some things that you said. But the side question is, do you believe in like a new paradigm concept or new earth, or what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I believe that we're in a process of deep, deep evolution, and ascension, and humanity is awakening, and
Mhm.
the awakening can no longer be stopped. And it was really set in motion to me, in my belief, through COVID, because it pushed us to the edge of being conditioned and put in a box and constricted, where we said, I want to break free and don't tell me what to do. I know what to do. Right here, and I'm pointing at my solar plexus, I know what to do. Um, and so I do believe we're in this like deep, deep, deep evolution that has kind of just like, and we can't be stopped. And yes, forces are kind of against us, and we're at this like fight. And it reminds me a lot of, I love Marvel, and I love,
Mm,
these movies. They like show us really what's happening through action figures and storytelling. But we are at this invisible war that's happening, and the way I feel, are fighting is not through guns, is not through violence, but through love,
mm.
through loving ourselves, loving our brother and sister because they are me. And that just pure love, not blind love, is what's going to move us into what some people call this new earth.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. And even if New Earth doesn't resonate with some of you guys, you could always just think of it as like redefining traditional things. The traditional church is being redefined by people like Maria who have this integrated concept of church, right? Or it's from your personal perspective and your calling that you're putting this out there for people to be a part of. And my comment was, did you know you said you were creating a church kind of for legal reasons? That's what you kind of perceived it to be. But I look at this when I look at your community, I'm like, wow, this is a new paradigm. This is replacing some of our old structures because I feel like sometimes people, I'm visiting family right now in LA, and I feel like sometimes they can't break away from the traditional church because they just don't know what would replace it. And it's places like the Hive Church and other communities, the more that these are going to be called to come forth, it can really redefine and give people more options so that they're not stuck in the old paradigm.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of just want to add something there. I feel that it's not just kind of a redefining, but it really is a remembering, because the old
Mm.
paradigm, there is an even older one from there, right? So it's going back not to this one, but to this one, and then seeing what went wrong there with the new knowing we have, because we don't want to end up here again. We want to jump from here into the evolution of integrated of the thousands and thousands of year of experience, and knowing what we don't want to become, to go back to what we are with this like 2.0 version.
Ah, there it is. I knew there was a connection to be made. I love that. So it's a remembrance, and it's coming back to more of our ancient ways and in the ancient wisdom, and and yeah, accepting what went wrong and where, so that we can
Mm-hmm.
learn from those mistakes. Another thing I wanted to comment on is I haven't heard of of embodying Christ consciousness in the third chakra in the solar plexus. Very interesting.
Yeah, so when they say Jesus said, I am the sun, it's talking about not the sun SON, is the SUN, sun. I am the sun, which is the solar plexus, right? That's where our sun is, and that's where all of our emotions are carried, our way of safety, our protection. And you can see that in many aspects, right? Like when we are not feeling safe or are closed off to something, the first thing that we'll do is we'll kind of close like this, and we're blocking that solar plexus area. We're not wanting to receive. And so a lot of the times through many alternative ways, we can go from, having a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of I don't want this anymore, right? And then we find things like alternative medicine, such as plant medicine, amphibian medicine, or anything other than Western medicine, and that can induce a heart opening, a heart cracking, which kind of will go from root sacral right into our heart and can essentially skip the solar plexus. And so I feel that a lot of the work for us is to go back to our solar plexus, because that's our place of safety. And so now that, and at least that has been my journey as well. And through different teachers, kind of putting the puzzle pieces together of what I have seen, what I hear, what I see, and what resonates. And so for me, my journey has been, okay, my heart is cracked open. And now I'm working on safety and regulating my nervous system to integrate all of that I went through in a way that I feel safe and I'm not just repeating the same fight or flight feelings. And in order to do that is to go back down from the heart into the solar plexus and really integrate that safety. It's also where we access, our intuition, in the sense of when we go silent, without the external, when we go into spaces of fasting, which fasting not only is talked about in the Bible by God, by Jesus, it also is talked about by Native American culture. When we do the vision quest or the sun dances and moon dances, we fast. And the reason we fast is because food, while it is nourishment, it can also be a way to fill our bellies so that we cannot feel our emotions. And actually, there were societies way, way, way back then that were able to feed themselves just through the sun. And so there is a practice in like Chinese medicine and, different beliefs that like you just open your mouth wide looking at the sun and you just like inhale and eat the sun, right? So that sun is nourishing your own inner sun, or your fire. Some people call it fire. And so it is igniting that sun and that fire within you, nourishing you. And so that being the sun, I am the sun, the Christ consciousness being right there, that access to our own wisdom.
That makes so much sense. And it's so simple, but it's just like, it's one of those things that kind of has probably gotten lost, in translation. Wow, that makes so
Not
much.
only lost, yes, but also I, for myself, I'll speak for myself, has been the hardest journey.
Hmm.
The cracking of my heart was not the hardest, because I feel that I've always had a big heart. I've always been at service of life in one way or another, which whether it was getting people their home in real estate or now helping people awaken and remember. But going to the solar plexus means my journey there has been going back to the last years of all of my life, from being conceived in my mother's belly to today, and remembering those first 10 years that were really hard for me, because we're not working with, and for all of us, right? Because at the young age, we're not working with the explicit mind where we can think and process. We're working with the implicit mind, which is all somatic. And so I did not remember my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of life, because there was so much trauma stored there. And it's all, where is it stored? In the solar plexus, because it's the implicit, is the feeling, is the somatic. And so going to access that is the hardest thing that we can do, to rescue that little girl and that little boy and bring it out. It's one of the hardest things. And so while I've done a lot of work in many areas, the hardest work for me has been to really remember what happened at 1, 2, 3, when I felt the depth of loneliness, of pain, that I could not process because I was not able to do that here just yet, but I could somatically feel it all. And so today, to go back and awaken that kind of memory that all of my body holds has been the hardest journey. And so it's not as easily accessed, right? As like the more, the layers are kind of more glaring there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so interesting. And it can be the hardest for people for sure. And in the spiritual community, I'm not saying this out of judgment, you guys, I'm just saying this out of awareness is like, you know, we have support with some of the medicines that do help us open up our heart chakra, or some of us can open it up, on our own too, just through meditation. So for some of us, we've had a little bit more of an easier journey with the heart chakra. But like you said, going back down, I mean, I think all of them are so important. I've been really doing like deep, like real deep dives into the root chakra because that's where I was being asked to do some more messaging. But yeah, the solar plexus is it's our self-expression, it's our willpower, it's our vitality, it's our emotions. And everything you were saying was really correlating with the as a human design coach with the spleen center and the solar and the emotional solar plexus, which together make up that third chakra. And it was all like connecting and aligning perfectly, which is really interesting. One quick thing, you also mentioned fasting separately from the chakras. Is there any correlation there from your perspective?
Fasting separately,
I mean, you just mentioned like fasting, and then we were also in the conversation of the chakras. I didn't know if there was any connection. Like, does fasting help someone who wants to work with their solar plexus, since it's all about willpower? I'm not sure if there was a connection there.
yeah, so traditionally, in many cultures, as I mentioned earlier, there were times of fasting to be able to access that vision, that inner wisdom. And the reason being is because we are, as human beings, we are fed by food and we are fed by connection to spirit. Typically, most of us go through life. You can be starved by one or the other, but not by both. And so
Mm,
most of us go through life starved of spirit, but fed by food, right?
mm, so
And
true.
then when we access these places of a vision quest, of yeah, going to a cave, or doing these like 3 day fasts, or there's more modern ways of doing it, but ultimately fasting for food, from food, from that nourishment, it allows us to connect deeper into being fed by spirit. And that's where more clarity comes. And you can think about it as easily as, some people can identify as like, oh, when I eat these foods, I feel more brain fog. But when we have these, and that's where intermediate fasting was kind of introduced, right? Because it allows the body to kind of almost go into a detoxification because it's eating all the remnants that's there, and it's clearing the mind, clearing, so there's a scientific backing, which I'm not a science girl. I know just enough to understand the science part versus the spiritual, and more of the spiritual. But there's so much scientific backing to back the theory. On the spiritual side is literally just being completely empty, becoming that hollow bone to really connect to those energetic centers, that when there's food, the body is so busy processing that food and doing whatever it needs to do, pulling the nutrients, whatever goes into like now your vowels and whatever, doing that whole process. It's not a lot of rest time and balance for you to be able to just sit, peacefully and in equanimity and go into deep meditative spaces or trances.
Beautiful. Yeah. Over the years, it took me a while to figure out like what was my main process for working with my emotions, like having emotional detox. And breath work and all the tools are helpful, but for me it's like, it wasn't until I really honed in and had the intention of doing fasting, like intermittent fasting on a, intentional, but with some balance and clarity and all the things and responsibility, doing it responsibly. That's when I realized like, wow, I get my full emotional detox, whether that's, maybe during the fast I end up crying. I end up doing like the deepest, darkest cry that was blocked by the foods, and coffee's been, it used to be a struggle, and then it kind of came back a couple of times recently, but it was a numbing thing, right? And so yes, food is nourishment. I love that we're focusing on this for right now, but also having those spaces, maybe just doing it once a month or looking into it to see like what is the calling for each individual, like what can it offer them, or how can they come back to self and find some clarity by doing that and being fed by the light. I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Earlier, you mentioned Magdalene, Mary Magdalene, and I wanted to see what resources or where can people go to kind of get more clarity on her, because there has been, some different stories out there, and just she was portrayed to be completely different. I feel I loved the Magdalene manuscript book, but do you have any resources or anywhere where people can start to go and kind of uncover some of that?
Yeah, so I really like the Magdalene manuscript, although the first part of that the manuscript is that channel part that's very powerful, and then it gets deeper into more of like practices to work with your sacral and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Um, there is a book called the Gospel, and we can attach it to link notes, I'm sure, later. It's called, I have it right here, Mary Magdalene Revealed.
Mm. Oh yes, I've seen that one. I haven't read it yet. Okay, Mary Magdalene Revealed.
Yeah, and I really recommend it because the author has studied Christianity and different various main religions for a long time, and then was able to have access to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which was not included in the Bible, along with other Gospels that were not included. And so it gives you part of the gospel of Mary Magdalene and the words that she uses and the things that she says that are really powerful. And then the author takes care of kind of like explaining it and giving her story to bring it into more, because they speak almost on in riddles, right? Those who have the eyes to see will see, and those that have the ears to hear will hear. And everybody hears and sees based on their level of comprehension and connection. And so she takes care of kind of like through her filter and level of comprehension and years of studying, takes care of kind of translating it in a way that is very digestible. So I really like that one. And then there's another book that in that book is recommended, and it's this New Testament that is including more gospels that were not included in the original Bibles, and goes back to the texts that the Bibles are actually based on, right? The Torah, the Quran, like all of these different texts. And so for somebody who perhaps doesn't have the desire to go deeply into each text, you can get books like this where the author has taken care of doing that and then bringing kind of their, well, here's what I've learned. So that's what I recommend, and really also just connecting to her, to Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and then Mary, Sister of Lazarus, through meditation, right? The three Marys connecting to that divine feminine energy, and seeing kind of what comes for you. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of the media is bringing forth Mary Magdalene as, kind of pairing it to this idea of non monogamy and open relating and things like that. And while there can be some truth there, it is not solely what Mary Magdalene was. Like, I feel like she's now being portrayed going from the whore that was originally portrayed as to now, like, well, then she's like just like this like sacred sexuality open to all of that, so I feel that there's these like pendulums being swung, and it's this is just as bad as this, right? But rather really being able to capture the essence of this woman and her commitment to Jesus and to the ways, to Christ consciousness. One of them is like, it talks about how Mary Magdalene was the one to find Jesus resurrected, the very first one, which means Christ was all, she had such a deep connection to Christ that she was there to witness that first moment. And she was that divine feminine connection to Christ consciousness. She was Christ as Jesus was Christ incarnated in many ways. So the book talks about that and is very, very special from like a
Mm,
non-mainstream media. Uh, yeah.
I love that. Thank you for that. So powerful. And as we wrap up, time went by so fast. So I'm trying to like select my last question here because I still had so many. But I think the question I wanted to hone in on, it probably ties up a loose end or just ties up something that we brought forward earlier. And what are your thoughts on, again, balancing community and still balancing sovereignty? And the reason why I'm asking is, one, there's an astrological reason. Our Pluto just moved into Aquarius recently, and it'll be there for the next 20 years. So it's a lot of humanity, community, collective energy happening. But also, I think the downside is people can lose their individuality or um, there's still some type of intentionality. And then even, in the traditional sense of church or any types of community, sometimes people feel like they don't fit in or that they have to still mold themselves to fit into a community. So, around this topic of community and individuality, do you have any insight for us on how we can just keep an awareness of still being sovereign and having the community support us? And also that example that you gave, that beautiful example of the Christian church supporting you and your family when you guys needed it the most, your mom and your newborn brother, right, in a time of need. So yeah, any insight around community and individuality merging together?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that because it happens a lot. It's happened to me too. And my efforts early on, in my efforts to fit in because it felt like a place where I could belong, there was a lot that I was overseeing that was not in my coherence. And so I believe that the first thing is to really come into coherence of what your truths are, what your non negotiables are, what your values and beliefs are. And from there, be able to extend yourself to community, but fully knowing what those are. And the community can bring some, invite you to some things. And ultimately, that's why the alone time, the connection to that solar plexus, to your emotions, is so important because then you get to come into the sermon and see, okay, I heard there's a saying in Spanish, I don't know if the same as in English, comes in one ear and leaves out the other, right? And so there are things that I hear when I go to different spaces and I'm like, boop, boop, like, no, that doesn't resonate for me. That doesn't work for me in my coherence, which is my full alignment. However, I respect that for you. And then there are other things that I'm like, hmm, okay, like that's like thought provoking within me. And so I feel that's very important as we move into this depth of community that it's being called for and that astrologically is being supported, is to still cultivate those spaces of alone time where you can come into integration and an alignment of coherence of what you believe, what your core values are. And I say that from a place of, yeah, like experience in challenging my core values and in a way of like, well, let me find out if I was just stubborn or like there's a new way, and ultimately realizing how far off to the end I went, and my whole body was reacting to that and telling me no, 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 that is not part of who you are. And so coming into that coherence and listening to my body that it's right, like I tried it, thank you, and it's no longer for me. I appreciate that.
Beautiful. That's it's inspirational because when we have the tools, when we have the awareness, we can be open to community and still trust ourselves, or still just have that awareness. Or even if you don't trust yourself all the way, you can work with it, right? You can just have the awareness, start there, have the awareness. So that's beautiful. Last question. What do you believe to be your mission or your purpose at this time in your life?
Um, Before I answer that, I would just like to add, and also for those that are the community leads, I feel it's so important to recognize that you are influential. You influence a lot of people, and this is something that I've really come deeply understand and in a way forgive myself in many ways that I didn't know what I didn't know, and influence people in ways that perhaps were not supportive because later I found that out. And a perfect example of that, and I know we're cutting it short, so I'll be quick, but the perfect example of that is when I had my implants done at 19. I was told by doctors that it was fine because it was saline and blah 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 blah, right? And the research later showed that it's not so good. And then I had my explant at 23. When I had my implants, other women that looked up to me also had their implants done. And it wasn't even because I said anything, but they just saw me and wanted to be like me and got them done. And in the same way, when I got my explant, other women began to have their explants because they were seeing me coming back into the natural state of being that I am. And so, like that, there are other examples I can give where I realized the depth of influence that I have on people, and especially on women, and the responsibility that that comes with. And to, so speaking to all of those that are leaders in community, to really feel into how you are navigating things from a place of discernment in a way that you recognize that your responsibility is also the people that follow and look up to you. So I thought that was important to kind of add
Wow.
to that.
Thank you for that.
My pleasure. What was the question again? I forgot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a powerful ending, but I'll just throw this in here in case you want to just yeah, say something short and sweet. What do you define your purpose and your mission as at this time of your life?
Yeah, thank you for sharing it with me again. And I feel like what I just shared kind of falls on that.
I feel like that
My
too.
purpose, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
my purpose and mission is to continue to be at the service of spirit and to continue to hold that space of safety, of unconditional love, for others to explore themselves and to find their own wisdom, finding their own God within, supporting them in that until they can find their own guidance and their own, um, yeah, uh,
Yeah.
God
So
within.
beautiful. Thank you for that. And I hope you guys feel inspired to connect with Maria. Her information is in the description. And verbally, just if you want to shout out the website for your church or any links to you, you can do that as well. How can people find you?
Yeah, thank you. You can go to the hivehealing.com, and that's our church. And then we're on Instagram. It's the Hive Entheogenic Church, or my personal Instagram is I am Maria Camila underscore. I also have my own shamanic storefront with all things shamanic, and it's thejourneybacktosoul.com. That's the website.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Namaste, everyone. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Bye.